Samsung's profits, meanwhile, down in the first quarter by a whopping 60%. Korean lawmakers give fast-track status to several controversial bills, one of them on election law. The opposition is protesting, saying they will not cooperate on anything in parliament, including bills on people's livelihoods. And Korea's industrial production is up for the month of March, with semiconductors leading the way, up compared to the month before, though mostly because it had been so low. It's 4:00 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to our afternoon broadcast. I'm Devin Whiting. Lawmakers in South Korea's National Assembly have had several days of heated confrontations over the move to fast-track several bills over the objections of the main opposition party. The bills now have fast-track status, but it's still going to be a struggle to get anything else done. Kim Min-ji has more.
Key reform bills will now take the fast-track procedure after two special parliamentary committees gave them the green light. 4 parties agreed last week to fast-track the bills, including one on electoral reform to boost proportional representation, one on the creation of an investigative body to probe corruption among high-ranking public officials, and another to boost the investigative rights of police. The designation comes after days of tension and even physical clashes between the rival parties due to fierce resistance from the main opposition Liberty Korea party. The 4 parties decided to push through so that the changes to the electoral system can be applied to next year's general elections. Fast-track designation prevents bills without bipartisan support from being sat in limbo for too long. Such bills can be put up for a full floor vote after 330 days at maximum, as the law stipulates the bills to be deliberated at respective committees within a certain number of days. But the period can be shortened if the parties reach an agreement. The ruling Democratic Party is seeking to cut that time to get the Moon Jae-in administration's reform drive rolling.
It's important for us to create a law that meets the people's expectations.
But a continued backlash is expected from the Liberty Korea party. It has condemned the fast-track move, saying revisions to the election law have always come through bipartisan agreement. This will likely put a pile of pending bills related to people's livelihoods on ice, as the party says it will no longer cooperate in legislative activities.
They have called an end to the 20th National Assembly. We will fight until the Moon Jae-in administration surrenders before the people.
What's more, getting enough support for the electoral reform bill itself could prove difficult, as the bill calls for increasing the number of proportional representation seats without changing the number of total parliamentary seats. Some individual lawmakers, regardless of party, may vote against it if their districts are scrapped or merged with others. The ruling Democratic Party has called on all parties, including the main opposition party, to work together and make appropriate changes to the bills during negotiations. But it appears that mending ties will be the key for a smooth fast-track process. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
President Moon Jae-in says recent data show improvements in terms of employment, largely, he says, thanks to government policies. Take a listen.
아직 고용 상황이 완전히 회복된 것은 아니지만 적어도 고용 시장 안에서는 적정 임금을 보장하고 고용 안전망을 강화하는 정부 정책 기조가 성과를 거두고 있습니다. 성과를 내는 정책은 정책대로 자신감을 가지고 꾸준히 밀고 나가고 미흡한 부분은 더욱 속도를 내서 보완해야 할 것입니다.
President Moon expressed concerns over the declining number of jobs in the manufacturing and retail industries, which has led to unstable employment among people in their 40s. He also noted that technological advancements and the aging population are isolating many people from the labor market, calling on the government to strengthen job security and the social safety net. He said these issues make the supplementary budget all the more necessary and called for more cooperation from the National Assembly so the budget can be used to get rid of blind spots in the labor market. Talks between the U.S. and North Korea have stalled for a while now, and comments from Secretary of State Pompeo suggest the U.S. is willing to let it stay that way until the conditions are right to make substantial progress, meaning no third summit until then. Our Kim Hyo-sun explains.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has commented on a possible third North Korea-U.S. summit, explaining it will be held when necessary conditions are created to make a big step forward. Speaking with the American political newspaper The Hill for its Newsmaker series, Pompeo said he couldn't specify the timing of a third meeting. However, he reaffirmed that Washington hopes to create the conditions so that if President Trump and North Korea's Kim Jong-un get together, they can make substantial progress. Pompeo also said progress was made in Hanoi, where the talks between the two leaders ended prematurely with no agreement. He explained that the two sides came to a deeper understanding of their respective range of freedom, as well as the path to take going forward. While explaining that resolving the North's nuclear issue is a difficult challenge, Pompeo stressed that continued economic pressure on the regime would eventually bring another opportunity to unlock and get North Korea to denuclearize. Stressing that Washington works closely with other countries, including Russia, China, Japan, and South Korea, Pompeo said the U.S. is making efforts to build a coalition to continue with the sanctions and try to resolve the North's nuclear issue. Kim Hye-sun, Arirang News.
Pompeo and others saying they're leaving the door open to another summit, but in the meantime, they want sanctions enforced. Another voice calling for a more comprehensive solution, the so-called big deal, is National Security Advisor John Bolton. EG1 has this report.
The U.S. seems to be getting ready for what is expected to be a long struggle against North Korea over the regime's denuclearization. In recent days, the U.S. has been reiterating its stance on making a big deal on Pyongyang's denuclearization while maintaining its current pressure campaign on the regime. In an interview on Monday, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo stressed that sanctions on the regime will eventually bring another opportunity to denuclearize North Korea, and that Washington is working with other countries to build a coalition to keep the economic pressure on the North. National Security Advisor John Bolton also emphasized that Russia and China could do more to tighten up their enforcement of these sanctions in his interview with Fox News over the weekend. He also touched on the need for a big deal as past policies, the step-by-step approaches, which gave the North economic relief before they actually committed to denuclearization, have all failed. At the Hanoi summit, the U.S. proposed that the North should agree to a deal where they submit a specific plan to eliminate nuclear weapons programs as well as all weapons of mass destruction before the lifting of any sanctions. While the top U.S. officials indirectly pressure North Korea and its allies, they have made sure to keep the door open for a possible third summit between Kim Jong-un and President Donald Trump. But a North Korea expert says that this doesn't mean the ball is necessarily in the North Korean court, as they themselves have been clear on their stance that sanctions need to be partially lifted with step-by-step denuclearization measures.
These interviews are simply to take the blame off Washington should the talks fall apart. There's nothing new in them, and it's not like this will spark something in their dialogue with the North. The U.S. also wants to let others know that it is still open for dialogue instead of taking military measures.
And with Kim Jong-un stating the end of the year as a deadline, the expert says the current stalemate is expected to last quite long. 이지원, Arirang News.
President Moon Jae-in says his government will boost the system semiconductor industry, that is, non-memory computer chips, to promote the sector as the country's future economic growth engine. During a visit to a Samsung electronics factory in the city of Hwaseong, Moon said his administration will work to promote system chips alongside biohealth and future automobiles. The president said he wants to make Korea a comprehensive semiconductor power, and to do that, make it #1 in the chip foundry sector and keep its lead in memory chips. Speaking of Samsung, earnings this spring at major South Korean companies have been down sharply. And at the tech giant Samsung, it was the same story, down 60% from a year ago. Our Ko Ryun-hee has the details.
Samsung Electronics operating profits during the January to March period marked an over 2-year low, mainly due to poor chip sales. The company revealed on Tuesday that the figure marked around $5.36 billion. This is down more than 60% on year and more than 40% on quarter. Sales also slumped by more than 10% during the same period, standing at around $45 billion. As for why, analysts point to weak memory chip earnings. Chip prices have been falling mainly due to oversupply and lower demand. The average price of DRAM chips fell more than 20% in the January to March period compared to the previous quarter. In addition, many IT companies have been postponing investment or clearing stocks as part of a wait-and-see approach for chip prices to go down even further. Because operating profits in the chip market account for around two-thirds of the South Korean tech giant's total profits, this directly affected Samsung's overall earnings. Display panels suffered a loss for the first time since the first quarter of 2016. This was mainly due to lower prices of LCD panels and fewer shipments of OLED panels. Operating profits for Samsung's IT and mobile communications, including smartphones, marked a 50% increase compared to the previous quarter, thanks to the popularity of the Galaxy S10. Meanwhile, to turn things around, Samsung announced earlier that it will venture into other sectors outside the memory field. The firm plans to invest around $116 billion in its system-on-chip business through 2030. 고르니, Arirang News.
Profits at LG Electronics were also down in the first quarter by almost 19% from a year earlier. LG said Tuesday that it recorded $12.8 billion in revenue and profits of $771 million. Compared to the quarter before, that was a decline in revenue of around 5%, but an increase in profit of almost 11-fold. LG posted record sales of home appliances, including air purifiers, but losses for its mobile communications and home entertainment businesses. South Korea's industrial output went up in March from a month earlier. It was mostly due to an increase in production of semiconductors, but also because output in February was so weak. Kim Da-mi has more.
The three main indicators of industrial activity all increased last month in a so-called triple rebound. For the month of March, industrial output across all sectors in South Korea edged up 1.1% compared to the previous month. Statistics Korea said on Tuesday that the on-month increase is mainly due to increased production of semiconductors, which ticked up 3.6% last month. The agency said the increased exports of semiconductors came from the introduction of new high-capacity smartphone models. Retail sales also jumped 3.3% from a month earlier. Fine dust pollution led to strong sales of domestic appliances like air purifiers and steam closets. Sales growth in machinery and transport equipment also led to a 10% spike in facility investment. However, the agency also noted that the triple rebound also comes from such poor performances from the previous month. In addition, overall industrial output actually fell by 0.7% on-year in the month of March. Meanwhile, South Korean companies' business outlook for April has improved slightly compared to the month before. According to the Bank of Korea on Tuesday, the business survey index for all industries recorded 74 in April, up a single point on month. The BOK said business sentiment among electronics manufacturers fell, but oil refining companies and petrochemical companies showed better sentiment on rising global oil prices. However, as the figure still remaining below 100, there are more pessimists than optimists. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
It's time now to take a closer look at the markets here in Korea and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Mr. Daniel Yu, Global Strategist at QM Securities. Mr. Yu, thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, stocks on Wall Street continue to post new highs on Monday. That was true for both the S&P and the NASDAQ.
Right, correct. Yes, U.S. market seems to continue to be strong. The main reason for that is because economic numbers are coming in better than expected, as well as the earnings releases are coming in better than expected. More than 80% of the earnings released by the U.S. companies are beating the estimations, according to the FactSet data. Particularly the growth sector, including the IT and bio, are showing very strong earnings numbers. Most of the well-known names such as Facebook, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and various other names within FANG and MANG stocks, they're all showing a much better than expected earnings in terms of the bottom line. And there is expectation of the FOMC meeting coming soon. And we've seen some of the consumer numbers coming in, and which is much stronger than expected at 0.9% month-on-month growth versus the estimations of 0.7% rise. And also the core PCE price index came in at only 1.6% growth, falling from the previous month of 1.7%, which means that the rate will be kept constant despite the strong consumer expenditures. So which means that market should have some more room to go up. But yes, it has been going up quite rapidly. So you might see somewhat of a taking breather period, but nevertheless, the fundamental seems to be very strong.
Well, here in Korea, we've seen things going up recently as well. The Kospi climbing back to the 2,200 mark yesterday, but investors apparently not sure which way we're going. Back down again today.
Right. But in terms of the decline, it seems that reasonably okay. Despite the very weak results released by Samsung Electronics, market was down by 0.58% for Kospi, but Kosdaq was up 0.55%. Now, the reason why the Kospi had a significant decline the previous week was because of the low economic growth numbers. Everybody been focusing on this number that the Q-on-Q numbers were declining by 0.3% versus the expectation of 0.3% rise. Particularly the facility investment was down the most of 10.8%, which is the lowest since 2008 numbers. But if you look into the future, as you've heard, the industrial output numbers are rising. Also, Samsung is planning to invest much more heavier in terms of the foundry business going forward. Also, the regulation in regards to a lot of these industries are expected to decline, which means that the business environment would probably going into the future better. So all being said, despite all these weak results and the bad numbers in terms of economic numbers, because the market is looking into the future, it seems to be stabilizing, and there's probably more room to rise on very cheap valuations.
Well, another story here in the background today, the U.S. and China holding another round of high-level trade talks in Beijing. Stephen Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, saying they're nearing the end, and he's looking forward to an agreement. What do you see happening, and how are the financial markets responding or going to respond to that?
Right. If you look at the Chinese market, it has fallen quite a bit in the last several days, which means that people are still probably skeptical in regards to the agreement being reached anytime soon. But I believe that the most likely the deal will be done before the end of the first half of 2019, because both Trump and Xi Jinping do not have enough time. They need to see that agreement done to see it for Trump to win the election next year. For that, meaning that GDP growth rate picking up going into the 2020s. Now, we think that if the agreement does happen, yes, the economic growth rate should pick up on a global basis. We think that the protectionism have prevented for a strong economic growth for the global scale, and that has resulted into the very poor equity market last year. But going into the future, if the deal is done, then most likely that global growth rate should normalize in 2020, or probably in second half of this year. So, which means that corporate earnings are declining right now, but we would like to see it that picking up in the second half, but definitely most likely that the earnings will be picking up in next year. Yes, right now the PMI number from China is coming in slightly worse than expected, but still it's expansionary at 50-plus numbers. So we think that the market should rebound based on that. That should probably have a bigger impact on global scale with this policies, the agreement coming into the picture soon.
Got it. Well, that's where we're going to have to leave it today. Mr. Yu, thanks for your insights today, as always.
Thank you very much.
Now, South Korea is #1 in the world again in terms of the amount of money it spends on research and development in proportion to its GDP. Based on OECD figures from 2017, it beat the previous leader, Israel. That's according to the Korea Institute of Science and Technology, Evaluation, and the Science Ministry. They explain that R&D spending in terms of GDP came to 4.55%. The first time Korea beat Israel was 2013, but Israel had taken back the top spot for the next 2 years. In 2017, Israel was second, followed by Switzerland. A new joint task force of top officials from the government and financial institutions has announced concrete plans for President Moon's vision of innovative finance. They held their first meeting today. In it, the heads of major financial groups and banks set a goal of lending and investing a total of around $193 billion U.S. dollars. From the banks, around $86 billion over the next 3 years, and from investment groups, $107 billion in the next 5 years. Leading the task force, the chairman of the Financial Services Commission, Choi Jong-gu, said innovative finance requires cooperation from the private sector. And considering the state of the economy, it's important to make the shift now. As just mentioned, the U.S. and China are sitting down for trade talks, both sides sounding optimistic, but observers say any deal could still fall apart. Lee Seung-jae reports.
The trade war between the world's biggest economic powerhouses seems to be reaching its endgame, as U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin are back in Beijing for more high-level talks. The two countries say they've made progress on issues, including intellectual property and forced technology transfer, which may ultimately end a conflict marred by tit-for-tat tariffs that have cost the two sides billions of dollars, disrupted supply chains, and shaken financial markets around the world. The trade talks will continue on in Washington next week, with Chinese Vice Premier Liu He heading to the U.S. Capitol for more discussions starting on May 8th. The scheduled talks are a further indication that the U.S. and China are inching closer to a deal. Mnuchin confirmed ahead of this week's meeting in Beijing that the trade talks are now close to wrapping up. However, according to the New York Times, the U.S. remains cautious, as Mnuchin has admitted the negotiations are at a stage where either an agreement could happen or it could all fall apart. The report added, Mnuchin did not want to say if the talks would conclude by the end of June, but did signal that both countries have the desire to thrash out a deal. Trade advisors in China appear more confident an agreement can be reached, saying both sides need it politically, who is seen in China as being eager to clinch a deal before the 2020 U.S. presidential election. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Earlier this month, South Korea became the first country in the world to launch a commercial 5G mobile network. There's a lot of excitement about what it can do, running 20 times faster than previous technology. Our Oh So-young looks at what this speed could mean for our everyday lives.
The pace of life gets 20 times faster in the middle of South Korea's bustling Gangnam area. A pop-up centre is showcasing the network's capabilities and has attracted more than 50,000 people in the first 2 weeks since it opened earlier this month. Using VR goggles that run seamlessly on 5G, you can star in your favourite K-pop performances and even find a celebrity companion to go on a virtual date with.
It's so three-dimensional, I can even see the wrinkles.
You can play online games and watch sports in real time from various angles and through the eyes of multiple players.
A lot more immersive and kind of more visceral. There was no lag or anything like that. Like, it was as quick and responsive as if it was from a console, you know.
Taking a break at a hotel is also expected to become an upgraded experience. At an AI hotel in Eastern Seoul, powered by KT Corporation, most room service functions like amenities and controlling the air conditioning are already available on demand through AI. And of course, the most important thing.
와이파이 비밀번호 알려줘.
The hotel plans to enhance these services even more with the introduction of 5G robots this year.
5G robots will deliver the amenities or services ordered by the AI speaker, which currently runs on English and Korean. We plan to add Japanese and Chinese this year, as well as introduce our hotel solution to Japan, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Hong Kong.
Telecom firms have also introduced 5G offices, restaurants, and even concerts that run on the superfast network. However, for such services to work seamlessly, more 5G base stations need to be installed throughout the country, and potential security issues need to be addressed. Oh So-young, Arirang News.
That brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.
Planning a self-guided tour in Korea?